Hi guys, and welcome back to the Pickle Jar for another Monster Hunter World the board game painting tutorial. Today we're painting up Jyuratodus, which is the big muddy fish from Monster Hunter Worlds, lives in the muddy swampy area of the Wildspire Waste, and this is one that I wasn't sure how I wanted to tackle it at first. I primed it in Raven Black from Colourforge and then decided to utilise some of the new remixed paints from Turbodork. They recently remixed a bunch of their paints, reformulated them, and I have to say that these went on absolutely fantastic. I've loved these paints for a long time. They were very kind enough to send me out a bunch of these to try out. So I went with actually a few of them. Rather than just using one, I applied a base coat all over and then used a separate paint as like a highlight, so a sort of bluey green over the top of the sort of greeny purple that I'd put on as a base coat. I used this as a highlight on top of the head, on top of some of the fins, just so that I'd got a real changing colour across the entire model, really trying to capture that sort of fish look where the scales changed lots of different colours. I then used a metallic red just for the underscales, so like on the belly, under its neck, just so they got a bit more variety. A lot of fish that I looked at as sort of reference art had got this sort of pattern to them, and I decided that would look pretty cool for Jyuratodus, so I decided to add that in as well. Once I'd done all that, I just took some regular acrylic paint. This is from the Two Thin Coats paint range, and I just took a red and painted off the sort of frills on the end of its fins. I just gave them a base coat, gave them a quick highlight, and then a further quick highlight, just so that it wasn't all the sort of shiny, reflective material. Next, I painted in all the mud detail that was on the model. Now, it's all sculpted on, and you could just paint it as the mud and leave it at that, but I knew I wanted to add a bit more to this later on. I wasn't particularly happy with how it looked just painting it as mud, so we'll come back to that a little bit later on, but for now I'm just outlining it so I can see where all the mud goes. Once I got that done, I added in details like his tongue, his gums, his teeth. Nothing particularly interesting here, just putting a pink base coat down and then added a purple wash to the gums and the tongue, and then just going in and painting the teeth afterwards. Nice and simple. You don't have to get too overcomplicated with stuff like this, especially in a monster this big. The focus should be the sort of scales, the shininess of the scales, and the mud itself. Speaking of the mud, I'm using the AK Terrain Muddy Ground Acrylic for the base, and I'll come back to this later on as well. Rather than using my tried and tested base ready glue and base ready material from Geek Gaming Scenics, I thought this one deserved something more fitting for the style. And this lighter brown mud that I'm using is the Vallejo Weathering Effects Thick Mud paste, which is a different texture and a different colour, and I thought the two together would look really good. Once I'd started putting this on, I decided that I was actually just going to use this mud texture and the previous mud texture on the model itself to give it the same mud. I figured it needs to look the same as the base so that it is the same mud rather than it being just painted on. And this was very nerve-wracking, just applying a load of texture paste to the model, but in the end, once it all dried and everything, it looked really, really good. I put both on, so you got the sort of thicker mud underneath that was more dried out, which was why it was paler, and then the wetter mud on top. And then, as you can see now, went over and gave everything a brown wash through the airbrush. This actually ended up taking away the shine, so I ended up having to go back over it with a gloss varnish to bring that glossiness back. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have put the wash on, but I'm actually still quite happy with how it ended up looking in the end. Once the mud texture had mostly dried, I decided to add the last couple of bits to the base and the model itself. So the first thing that I was adding was the AK Puddles acrylic effect to give the water, because it's supposed to be muddy water, not just mud. And then once that was on and dried, I added some of the Vallejo water texture paste, which just, again, to add some ripples and add some movement onto the water on top. It's my first time using these. I probably could have done a better job, but I'm still pretty happy with how these turned out in the end. It all blend together because I sort of didn't wait until they were fully dry on each layer, so the mud and the water effect. So you end up with this really muddy water effect that looks quite nice, and I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and a comment down below. And until next time, guys, enjoy your hobby.